The first snowflake of winter landed on Loren Yates's rough knuckle as he stacked the last cord of firewood against the barn. And he knew without looking up that the blizzard everyone in the valley had been whispering about was finally here. He was halfway to the house when he heard it. A heavy thump against his front door, followed by a scraping sound like something large trying to find purchase on the icy porch steps. His hand went instinctively to the hunting knife at his belt, though what good it would do against a bear or mountain cat he did not know. But when he rounded the corner of his modest cabin, rifle now in hand, what he saw made him freeze in a way that had nothing to do with the rapidly dropping temperature. An orc woman knelt on his porch, one massive hand braced against the doorframe, the other clutched to her side where dark blood seeped between her fingers. Her skin was a deep forest green, darker where the cold had begun to leach the warmth from her extremities, and her breath came in ragged white clouds. She wore leather armor that had seen better days, torn and scored with what looked like claw marks, and her black hair hung in a thick braid down her back, matted with snow and ice. When she lifted her head, her amber eyes met his with a mixture of desperation and fierce pride that made his chest tighten. "Can I stay just one night?" she asked, her voice rough but clear. "I will be gone by morning. You have my word." Loren stood there, the wind howling around him, snow already beginning to pile in drifts against the porch rails. Every practical instinct he had developed over 8 years of frontier living screamed at him to say no. Orcs were trouble. Everyone knew that. They raided settlements, killed livestock, and anyone fool enough to help one would find themselves ostracized faster than they could spit. But looking at her now, watching her struggle to stay upright, seeing the way her strength was clearly failing, he found he could not form the word. "You are bleeding," he said instead, lowering the rifle slightly. "I am aware," she replied, a hint of grim humor in her tone. "A saber-tooth took exception to me crossing its territory. I took exception to it trying to eat me. We reached an understanding, but not before it made its point." Despite everything, despite the absolute insanity of what he was about to do, Loren felt the corner of his mouth twitch. He stepped forward, shouldering the rifle, and held out his hand. "Can you walk?" She stared at his outstretched palm like it was a viper about to strike. "I can manage." That was not what I asked. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, and he wondered what she saw. He was not an impressive specimen by most standards, tall but lean, with brown hair that needed cutting and a beard that needed trimming. His clothes were practical homespun, patched in places, and his hands were calloused from endless work. He had been told once that he had kind eyes, but he suspected that was just something Rachel Thornton had said before she decided to marry the merchant's son instead of a struggling farmer with more land than sense. Finally, the orc woman reached out and grasped his hand. Her palm was rough, her grip strong despite her injury, and she was heavier than he expected when she leaned her weight against him. He half carried, half dragged her inside, kicking the door shut against the wind. The cabin was small, just one main room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and his bed in the corner. A loft overhead held his supplies and winter stores. It was not much, but it was warm and dry, and right now that was all that mattered. "The bed," he said, guiding her toward it. "The floor is fine." "The bed," he repeated more firmly. "I need to see that wound, and I am not doing it with you sprawled on frozen floorboards." She did not argue further, which told him more about her condition than any words could have. He helped her sit, then moved to stoke the fire and light the oil lamps. When he turned back with his medical supplies such as they were, she had removed the damaged armor and was trying to peel away the leather tunic beneath. Her hands shook with the effort. "Let me," Loren said quietly, setting the supplies on the small table beside the bed. She tensed but nodded. He worked carefully, cutting away the ruined leather to expose the wound. 3 deep gashes ran from just below her ribs to her hip, angry and inflamed. He had seen enough hunting injuries to know that while they looked terrible, they had missed anything vital. But infection was a real risk, especially if she had been traveling in the cold. "This is going to hurt," he warned, reaching for the bottle of grain alcohol he kept for emergencies. "I have had worse," he believed her. As he cleaned the wound, she made no sound beyond a slight hiss through her teeth. Her hands gripped the edge of the bed frame hard enough that he heard the wood creak, but she held perfectly still. He worked as quickly as his skill allowed, applying a poultice of herbs his mother had taught him to make before the fever took her, then wrapping clean linen around her torso. By the time he finished, both of them were sweating despite the cold that still clung to the walls. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "I know this is not a small thing you have done." Loren busied himself cleaning up the bloody cloths and putting away the supplies. "What is your name?" "Grisha. Loren Yates." He glanced at her, then away. "You said you would be gone by morning." "I did. That blizzard out there is going to last 3 days, maybe more. You will not make it 100 yards in that, let alone wherever you are trying to go." Grisha was silent for a long moment. When he finally looked at her, she was studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You are suggesting I stay longer. I am suggesting you would be a fool not to. And since you were smart enough to survive a saber-tooth, I am assuming you are not a fool. Staying here puts you at risk. If anyone learns you sheltered me, the nearest neighbor is 4 miles down the valley, and they will not be going anywhere in this weather any more than you will. By the time the snow clears, you will be long gone, and no one will know any different." She continued to stare at him, and he felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. It was a fair question, and one he did not have a good answer for. He could have said it was simple human decency, that anyone would do the same. But that would have been a lie, and they both knew it. Most humans would have shot first and not bothered with questions. Some would have shot her, and then turned her body over to the militia for a bounty. The fact that he had not done either of those things already marked him as either extraordinary or extraordinarily stupid. "Get some rest," he said instead of answering. "I will make us something to eat." He moved to the small kitchen area, pulling out a pot and the ingredients for a simple stew. The work was familiar, comforting, and it gave him something to do with his hands while his mind raced. What was he thinking? Grisha was right. If anyone found out about this, he would be finished in the valley. At best, he would be shunned. At worst, they might decide to make an example of him. But even as those thoughts circled through his head, he could not bring himself to regret opening that door. Behind him, he heard Grisha shift on the bed, testing the bandages. "You live alone," she observed. "I do, by choice, by circumstance." He added potatoes to the pot, not looking at her. "This was my father's land. He died 4 winters ago. My mother went the winter before that. I had a brother, but he went east looking for better opportunities. Have not heard from him in 2 years. I am sorry." The simple sincerity in her voice surprised him. He glanced over his shoulder and found her watching him with an expression that was hard to read. "What about you? Does your clan know where you are?" Her jaw tightened. "I do not have a clan, not anymore." He wanted to ask what that meant, but the look on her face told him it was not a topic she wished to discuss. Instead, he focused on the stew, adding salt and herbs, letting the silence stretch between them. It was not an uncomfortable silence, which surprised him even more. After so many months alone with only his own thoughts for company, he had expected the presence of another person to feel intrusive. But somehow, Having Grisha there felt almost natural, as if the cabin had been waiting for someone to fill the empty spaces. When the stew was ready, he ladled 2 bowls and brought one to her. She took it with both hands, studying the contents with interest. "It smells good. It is nothing fancy. Fancy is overrated." She took a cautious sip, then a larger one. "This is good, thank you." They ate in that same companionable quiet, the wind howling outside and the fire crackling in the hearth. Loren found himself stealing glances at her when he thought she was not looking. She was striking in a way he had not expected. Her features were strong, angular, with high cheekbones and a proud nose. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her upper lip, and somehow they made her more interesting rather than less. There was a grace to the way she moved, even injured, that spoke of a warrior's training. "You are staring," she said without looking up from her bowl. He jerked his gaze away, feeling like a schoolboy caught passing notes. "Sorry. It is understandable. I imagine you do not see many orcs. Not many that are not trying to steal my chickens, no." To his surprise, she laughed. It was a rich, warm sound that seemed to fill the small cabin. "I promise, your chickens are safe from me. I prefer my meat less feathery." He found himself smiling despite his embarrassment. "Good to know." They finished eating and Loren took the bowls to wash. When he turned back, he found Grisha struggling to stand, her face pale with the effort. "What are you doing?" "I need to relieve myself." "Right. Yes, of course." He moved quickly to help her, guiding her to the small back room where he had set up a chamber pot for winter use. He left her there with as much dignity as he could manage, returning to bank the fire for the night. When she emerged, she was moving more carefully, one hand pressed to her bandaged side. "You should sleep," he said, gesturing to the bed. "Where will you sleep?" "I have blankets." "The floor by the fire will be fine." "Loren." She said his name with a firmness that made him look at her. "You have already done more than I had any right to ask. I will not take your bed as well. You are injured. And you have been working all day. I can see it in the way you move." She lowered herself carefully back onto the bed. "This bed is large enough for 2 people to sleep without touching. We are both adults. We can manage one night." His mouth went dry. She was right. The bed was fairly wide, built by his father to accommodate both his parents. And they were both exhausted. And it would be ridiculous for him to sleep on the hard floor when there was a perfectly good bed available. But the thought of lying next to her, even with a respectable distance between them, made his heart beat faster for reasons he did not want to examine too closely. "If you are sure," he said finally. "I am sure." He added more wood to the fire, checked that the door was barred against the storm, and extinguished all but one lamp. Then, moving slowly, he lay down on the far edge of the bed, as close to falling off as he could manage without actually doing so. Grisha was already on her side, facing away from him, her breathing slow and measured. He stared at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every tiny movement, every shift of the mattress. "Loren," she said quietly into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything. You already thanked me, I know. But I wanted to say it again." He did not know what to say to that, so he simply closed his eyes and tried to will himself to sleep. It took a long time, but eventually, exhaustion won out over anxiety, and he drifted off to the sound of wind and the knowledge that, for the first time in a very long time, he was not alone. He woke to the smell of frying bacon and the sound of someone moving around his kitchen. For a confused moment, he thought he was dreaming, back in a time when his mother was alive, and mornings began with the sizzle of breakfast on the stove. Then memory returned, and he sat up quickly, looking around. Grisha stood at his stove, moving more easily than she had the night before, stirring something in his largest pan. She had somehow found and put on one of his spare shirts, which fit her surprisingly well despite their size difference. "You should not be up," he said, swinging his legs out of bed. "I am fine. The rest helped." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "I hope you do not mind. I found eggs in your cold box and thought I would make myself useful. You are a guest. You do not need to. I am a burden," she corrected gently. "The least I can do is help where I can." He started to argue, then realized it would be pointless. Instead, he moved to the window and peered out through the frost-covered glass. Snow was falling so thick he could barely see the barn, and drifts were already piling halfway up the door. She had been right about the storm. No one was going anywhere for days. They ate breakfast together, and then Loren bundled up to check on his animals. The cold hit him like a fist when he stepped outside, stealing his breath. He fought his way through the drifts to the barn, where his cow, 2 goats, and handful of chickens huddled together for warmth. He fed and watered them, mucked out stalls, and gathered eggs, working by feel as much as sight in the dim interior. By the time he made it back to the house, his hands and feet were numb despite his heavy gloves and boots. Grisha had hot water ready for tea and helped him peel off his frozen outer layers. Her hands were steady and sure, and he found himself noticing small details. The way her brow furrowed in concentration, the surprising delicacy of her long fingers, the faint scar that ran along her jawline. She was beautiful, he realized with a start. Not in the conventional way, perhaps, but beautiful nonetheless. "Thank you," he said when he could feel his fingers again. "You keep thanking me for small things. You keep doing things worth thanking." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, quick and electric. Then she looked away, busying herself with tidying the already tidy table. "What do you do with yourself during these storms?" "Work, mostly. There is always something to mend or maintain. I have some books. I whittle a bit, though I am not very good at it." He paused. "What would you normally be doing?" "Traveling. I have been on the move for nearly 6 months now. 6 months is a long time to wander." "It is." She was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "I was cast out of my clan for refusing an arranged mating. The male they chose was cruel, and I wanted no part of it. But in orc culture, refusing a clan leader's decree is unforgivable, so I left before they could force me." Loren felt anger flare in his chest. "They would have forced you. They would have tried." "I did not stay to find out how far they would have gone." She touched the scar on her jaw absently. "I have been moving from place to place since then, taking work where I can find it, trying to stay ahead of anyone who might come looking. Are they still looking? I do not know. It has been long enough that they may have given up, or they may be more determined than ever. There is no way to know." He wanted to tell her she was safe here, that he would not let anyone hurt her, but the words seemed too large, too presumptuous for someone he had known less than a day. Instead, he said, "You are welcome to stay until the storm passes and you are healed enough to travel safely." She looked at him searchingly. "You barely know me. For all you know, I could be a murderer or a thief. Are you? No. Then I suppose we are fine." That surprised a laugh out of her, and he felt absurdly proud of himself for making it happen. They spent the rest of the day in quiet companionship, Loren working on repairing a broken harness, while Grisha mended the torn leather of her armor with supplies he provided. They talked in fits and starts, sharing stories of their childhoods, their families, the small moments that had shaped them. He learned that she loved the mountains, that she had a weakness for sweet things, that she had once wanted to be a healer before circumstances pushed her toward warrior training. She learned that he had inherited his father's stubborn streak and his mother's soft heart, that he missed his brother fiercely but understood why he left, that he sometimes went days without speaking out loud because there was no one to speak to. The storm raged on through that day and into the next. They fell into an easy routine. Loren would brave the cold to tend the animals while Grisha handled the indoor work, cooking and cleaning with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the silence. He taught her a dice game his father had favored, and she taught him orc counting rhymes that made him stumble over the unfamiliar syllables. She laughed when he got them wrong, and he found he did not mind being laughed at, not when it brought that light to her eyes. On the third night, as they were preparing for bed, she paused with her hand on the edge of the mattress. "Your neighbors. When they find out I was here, they will not find out. You cannot know that, Grisha." He waited until she looked at him. "Even if they did, I would not regret this, helping you, getting to know you, any of it." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. It was the first real, unguarded smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "You are a strange man, Loren Yates. I have been told that before." They climbed into bed, and this time the distance between them seemed less necessary, less important. He lay awake long after her breathing had evened out into sleep, thinking about the strange turns life could take. A week ago, he had been alone, resigned to another winter of isolation. Now, his small cabin felt full of warmth and life in a way it had not since his parents died. He knew it could not last. She had her journey and he had his land. But for now, for these stolen days during the storm, he allowed himself to simply be grateful. The next morning he woke to silence. Not the howling absence of the storm, but true quiet. He sat up carefully, trying not to wake Grisha, and looked out the window. The sky was clear, painfully blue, and the world was buried under more snow than he had seen in years. It would take days to dig out, but the storm itself had passed. Grisha stirred beside him, blinking awake. She followed his gaze to the window, and her expression shifted, something that might have been disappointment flashing across her features before she schooled it back to neutrality. "The storm is over." "It is." "Then I should prepare to leave." Neither of them moved. Loren knew he should agree, should help her pack her things and wish her well on her journey. Instead, he heard himself say, "Your wound is still healing. Another few days would not hurt, just to make sure infection has not set in." She turned to look at him fully. "Loren, I know. I know you need to move on, but please, just a few more days." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Finally, she nodded. A few more days. Those few days turned into a week, then two. The snow remained deep, making travel difficult but not impossible. Yet neither of them suggested she should go. Loren told himself he was being practical, that it would be foolish for her to leave before she was fully recovered. But late at night, lying beside her in the darkness, he admitted the truth. He did not want her to leave. The cabin that had felt sufficient before now seemed unbearably empty whenever he imagined her gone from it. They worked together to dig out paths to the barn and the well. They cut more firewood and hauled it inside. They cooked elaborate meals because they had the time, and it was something to do together. He showed her his small collection of books, and she read to him in the evenings, her voice giving life to stories he had read a dozen times before. In return, she taught him some of the fighting techniques her people used, laughing when he stumbled and praising him when he got something right. It was during one of these sessions, both of them breathless and flushed from exertion, that she suddenly stopped mid-movement. He followed her gaze out the window and saw what she had seen, smoke rising from the direction of his nearest neighbor's property. Someone was up and about, which meant the trails were becoming passable again. "I need to go," she said quietly. "You know I do." He did know. But knowing something and accepting it were two different things. "Where will you go?" "Further north." There are orc settlements near the border. They may take in a wanderer, no questions asked. That is weeks of travel in winter. I have done harder things." He wanted to argue to find some reason why she should stay. But what could he offer her? A life of hiding, of looking over her shoulder every time someone came to the valley. She deserved better than that. She deserved freedom and safety, not the constant fear of discovery. When? He asked instead. Tomorrow. Early, before anyone is likely to be traveling the roads. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Grisha repaired the last of her gear while Loren packed food for her journey: dried meat, hard cheese, the last of his mother's preserves. He gave her a waterproof cloak his father had made, warmer and better constructed than her own. She protested, but he insisted, and eventually she accepted with a quiet thank you that made his chest ache. They did not talk much that evening. There seemed to be too much to say and no good way to say any of it. They ate dinner in near silence, both picking at their food. When it came time for bed, Grisha hesitated. "I want to thank you," she started. "Please do not," he interrupted. "If you thank me now, it will feel too much like goodbye, and I am not ready for that yet." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. They lay down, and this time, without discussion or preamble, she moved closer to him. Not touching, but near enough that he could feel the warmth of her body, could hear each breath she took. He lay rigid, afraid to move, afraid that any motion would shatter this fragile moment. "Loren," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, I am going to miss this. Miss you." His heart hammered against his ribs. "I will miss you too. In another life, if things were different." She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. He knew what she meant because he had been thinking the same thing. In another life, one where orcs and humans did not hate and fear each other, where she was not running from her past and he was not bound to this land, maybe they could have had something. Maybe these weeks of quiet companionship could have grown into something more. He woke before dawn to find her already dressed, her pack ready by the door. She moved quietly, trying not to wake him, but he sat up and lit a lamp. In the flickering light, she looked achingly beautiful and impossibly distant, already half gone even though she stood only a few feet away. "I was going to leave a note," she said. "I am glad you did not get the chance." He climbed out of bed, pulling on his boots and coat. "I will walk with you to the road at least. You do not have to, I know, but I want to." They stepped out into the pre-dawn cold, their breath misting in the air. The world was still and silent, blanketed in white, and their footsteps crunched obscenely loud in the snow. They walked to the main road without speaking, and when they reached it, she turned to face him. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For giving me a place to heal, for treating me like a person instead of a monster. I will not forget it." Grisha, he stopped, not knowing how to put into words what he was feeling. "How did you tell someone they had become essential to you in a matter of weeks? How did you ask them to stay when you knew they could not?" She reached out and cupped his face with one large, warm hand. "I know," she said softly. "I know." Then she stepped back, shouldered her pack, and started walking north. He stood there and watched her go, watched her get smaller and smaller until she disappeared around a bend in the road. Even then he stood, staring at the empty space where she had been, feeling like something vital had been carved out of his chest. Finally, when his feet were numb and his face stung with cold, he turned and walked back to the cabin. It looked exactly as it had that morning, but somehow it felt fundamentally different. Empty. The bed was too large, the silence too loud. He went through his morning routine mechanically, fed the animals, collected eggs, started a fire. But everything felt hollow, performance without purpose. The days began to blur together. He worked from sunrise to sunset, pushing himself harder than necessary, trying to outrun the ache that had settled into his bones. Neighbors began to venture out as the weather improved, and he forced himself to be friendly, to act normal, to give them no reason to wonder what he had been doing during those long weeks of snow. He went to town for supplies and endured the usual mix of sympathy and derision that greeted him there. Poor Loren Yates, still alone on that struggling farm. Such a shame. Such a waste. Winter gave way slowly to early spring. The snow melted in patches, revealing the dead grass beneath. The days grew incrementally longer, though the nights remained bitterly cold. Loren planted the first of his crops, working the partially thawed ground until his back screamed in protest. The physical pain was almost welcome. It gave him something to focus on besides the empty cabin and the memories of amber eyes and musical laughter. It was nearly 2 months after Grisha left that he heard the knock on his door. He was not expecting anyone, and his first instinct was irritation at the interruption. But when he opened the door, his heart simply stopped. Grisha stood on his porch, thinner than he remembered, her face gaunt and her clothes travel-stained. But she was there, solid and real, and for a long moment all he could do was stare. "Can I stay just one night?" she asked, and there was something different in her voice, something tentative and vulnerable, of course, always. He stepped back to let her in, his mind racing. "Are you all right? What happened? Are you hurt?" She came inside and set down her pack with a heavy sigh. "I am fine. I am. I made it to the northern settlements, and they took me in, gave me work, a place to sleep, everything I thought I wanted." She turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "But I could not stop thinking about this place, about you." He swallowed hard. "Grisha, let me finish, please." She took a step closer. "I tried to convince myself I was being foolish, that what I was feeling was just gratitude or the strangeness of the situation. But the longer I stayed away, the worse it got. I would wake up and forget where I was, expect to see you working at that table or stoking the fire. And I realized that I had left my heart here in this cabin with you. You came back," he said, his voice rough. "I came back." Another step, and now she was close enough to touch. "If you will have me. I know it will not be easy. I know people will talk and there will be consequences. But I am tired of running, Loren. I am tired of being afraid, and I am tired of pretending I do not want to be here with you." He reached out and took her hands in his, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength in her fingers. "I have not stopped thinking about you either. Every single day I wished I had asked you to stay, or that I had been brave enough to tell you how I felt before you left." "Tell me now," she whispered. "I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you were so determined to not be a burden even though you could barely stand. And I kept falling every day after that, watching you laugh, hearing you read, learning who you are. I love you, Grisha." She closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms around him and holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. He held her just as tightly, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, breathing in the scent of her skin and hair. They stood there for a long time, neither willing to let go. "We should talk about practicalities," she said eventually, though she made no move to release him. "We should," he agreed, not releasing her either. She laughed, the sound muffled against his shoulder. "The neighbors will find out." "There is no avoiding it. Let them. I do not care what they think. You say that now, I mean it." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I have spent too long caring about what other people think, living my life according to their expectations. I do not want to do that anymore. If they have a problem with us, that is their concern, not ours. Some of them might do more than talk. Then we will deal with it, together." He cupped her face, mirroring the gesture she had made the morning she left. "I am not saying it will be easy. But I would rather face a hard life with you than an easy one without you." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. He kissed her back, pouring everything he had been feeling for the past 2 months into it, all the longing and loneliness and love. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "So I can stay?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. "More than just one night. You can stay forever if you want. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." Forever sounds about right. They spent that evening planning. Grisha had saved some money from her work in the northern settlements, enough to buy supplies and seed for a larger planting. With two of them working the land, they could expand the farm, make it truly profitable instead of merely subsistent. She had skills he lacked, and vice versa. Together, they could build something real and lasting. The first time a neighbor saw Grisha, it was old Martin Lawson, who lived 3 miles west. He had come to borrow some tools and nearly dropped them when she answered the door. Loren came up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Martin, this is Grisha. My partner." Martin stared, his mouth working soundlessly. Then he collected himself enough to nod stiffly, take the tools, and leave without another word. By evening, the entire valley would know. They came, of course. Not violently at first, but in small delegations of concerned neighbors who thought Loren had lost his mind. How could he let a monster live with him? Did he not know what orcs were capable of? Think of the children, the safety of the community, the sanctity of human spaces. He listened to each concern politely, then thanked them for their input and closed the door. Grisha never spoke during these visits, simply stood beside him, her face impassive, letting him handle the talking. But afterward, in the privacy of the cabin, he would hold her and feel the tension in her shoulders, the way she braced herself for rejection. "We could go somewhere else," she offered one night after a particularly hostile encounter. "Start over where no one knows us. This is my land. My family's land. I am not leaving it, and I am not letting them drive you away." He pulled her closer. "They will adjust, or they will not. Either way, we are staying." As spring progressed into summer, the hostility began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with Martha Ewan, a widow who lived at the far end of the valley. Her roof had started leaking badly, and she mentioned it to Loren when he saw her at the general store. That evening, he and Grisha rode over with tools and supplies. Martha watched nervously as Grisha scaled the roof with an ease that spoke of her orc strength and agility, making repairs in a fraction of the time it would have taken Loren alone. "Thank you," Martha said quietly when they were done, looking up at Grisha with something that was not quite acceptance but was no longer fear. "You are welcome," Grisha replied with equal quiet. Word spread. The orc woman was strong, skilled, and apparently not inclined to murder people in their sleep. When Samuel Dover's plow horse threw a shoe and went lame, it was Grisha who managed to calm the panicked animal and help the farrier get close enough to treat it. When young Timothy Chen fell through the ice on the pond, Grisha was the one who dove in without hesitation to pull him out, her orc constitution allowing her to withstand the freezing water long enough to save his life. Slowly, grudgingly, the valley began to accept her presence. Not everyone, certainly. There were those who would never approve, who crossed to the other side of the road when they saw her coming. But there were others who nodded greetings, who stopped to chat about the weather and the crops, who remembered that before she was an orc, she was a person. Summer brought the best harvest Loren had seen in years. Working together, he and Grisha had planted more than he ever could have alone, and the results showed in the full granary and healthy livestock. They sold the surplus at market, and for the first time since his father died, Loren had money to spare. They used it to make improvements to the cabin, adding a second room and replacing the old roof. It began to feel less like a bachelor's temporary shelter and more like a real home. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grisha leaned against his shoulder. "I have been thinking," she said, about the future, about us." She paused, choosing her words carefully. In Orc culture, when two people decide to commit to each other permanently, they undergo a bonding ceremony. It is similar to human marriage, I suppose, but different in the details. His heart began to beat faster. "Are you asking me something?" "I am saying that I want that with you. I want to be bonded to you in whatever way our two cultures can manage. I want everyone to know that we belong to each other." He turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, the hope she was trying to hide. "Yes," he said simply. "However we need to do it, whatever it takes, yes." Her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Yes. Did you think I would say no? Grisha, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life together, have a family if we are blessed enough, grow old watching the seasons change. So yes, absolutely yes." She kissed him then, fierce and joyful, and he kissed her back with equal fervor. They would figure out the details, combine human and Orc traditions into something uniquely theirs. But the important part was the commitment, the promise they were making to each other. They held the ceremony on the autumn equinox, as the leaves were turning gold and red. The human priest in town had refused to participate, which surprised no one. But they found an elder from one of the northern Orc settlements willing to make the journey, and he performed the traditional bonding ritual in their yard. It was simple and beautiful. They spoke vows in both languages, exchanged tokens they had made for each other, and shared blood from small cuts on their palms, mingling their life forces in the way of her people. Some of the neighbors came, curiosity overcoming prejudice. Others stayed away, making their disapproval clear. Loren found he did not care. The only person whose presence mattered was already standing beside him, her hand clasped in his, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness. "I love you," he said when the ceremony was complete, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I love you," she replied just as loudly. "My husband, my wife." They celebrated with a feast they had prepared together, serving food from both their traditions. A few of the neighbors who had come stayed to eat, and by the end of the evening, even the most skeptical were laughing at the stories the Orc elder told about his own bonding ceremony decades earlier. It was not perfect acceptance, but it was a start. Winter came again, but this time Loren faced it without dread. The cabin that had felt so empty a year ago now felt warm and full of life. They spent the long evenings by the fire, Grisha teaching him more of her language while he taught her to read and write in his. They made plans for the coming spring, talking about expanding the farm further, maybe even breeding horses if they could afford it. She told him stories of Orc lands and culture, and he shared memories of his family, keeping them alive through words. One particularly cold night, as snow fell softly outside, Grisha placed his hand on her stomach. "I think I am pregnant," she said quietly. For a moment he could not process the words. Then their meaning hit him like a physical blow, and he looked up at her with wonder. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I am 2 weeks late and I have been feeling strange, and I know my body well enough to recognize when something has changed." She searched his face anxiously. "Are you happy? I know we did not specifically plan for this." "Happy," he laughed, the sound almost giddy. "Grisha, I am. I do not even have words for what I am feeling right now. Yes, I am happy. I am terrified and amazed and so incredibly happy." She relaxed, relief washing over her features. "I am scared too," she admitted. "I do not know if a human Orc child is even possible." What if something goes wrong? What if he silenced her with a gentle kiss? We will figure it out, together, like we figure out everything else. What will people say? At this point, I think they have said everything they are going to say about us. A baby will not change that one way or another. She laughed shakily and let him pull her close. They sat there for a long time, holding each other, contemplating the new life that might be growing inside her. It would be a challenge, certainly. A child who belonged to both their worlds and neither would face difficulties they could only begin to imagine. But they would face those difficulties together, and they would teach their child to be strong and proud and kind. Spring came again with all its promise and renewal. Grisha's pregnancy became undeniable, her body changing to accommodate the life within. She remained strong and active well into her second trimester, insisting on helping with the farm work until Loren put his foot down and made her rest. The same neighbors who had been so hostile the year before now brought baby clothes and advice, their maternal instincts apparently overriding their prejudices. Not all of them, but enough. Martha Ewan became a particular ally, having raised 6 children of her own. She taught Grisha things her own mother would have taught her if circumstances had been different. And Loren often came home to find the two women sitting together, talking in low voices about matters he wisely chose not to inquire about. When Grisha went into labor on a warm day in late spring, it was Martha who attended her along with a midwife from town who had agreed to come despite the unusual circumstances. Loren paced outside like every anxious father, listening to the sounds from within and feeling utterly helpless. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when he genuinely feared he might lose either Grisha or the baby or both. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, he heard it, the thin, reedy cry of a newborn. Martha opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, beautiful son. You can come in now." He entered the room on shaking legs. Grisha lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion. But she was smiling, and in her arms was the tiniest person he had ever seen. The baby had her green skin, though a lighter shade, and his dark hair. His ears were slightly pointed, and as Loren watched, the baby opened his eyes, revealing amber irises flecked with brown. "He is perfect," Loren whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You are perfect. Both of you. Do you want to hold him?" He took his son with trembling hands, amazed at how light and fragile he felt. The baby squirmed, making small noises, and Loren felt something inside him shift and settle, like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. This was his family. His wife, his child. Everything he had ever wanted without knowing he wanted it. "What should we name him?" Grisha asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, debating the merits of human versus orc traditions. In the end, they chose to honor both. "Garrett," Loren said. "After my father, and Rock after yours." "Garrett Rock Yates," Grisha tested, then smiled. "Yes, that is good." The baby Garrett grew quickly, showing the hybrid vigor of his mixed heritage. He had his mother's strength and his father's stubborn determination, and he was loved beyond measure. The neighbors who had been unsure about an orc woman living among them found they could not resist a baby, even one who looked different from their own children. Garrett became a bridge between the two communities in ways his parents could not have anticipated. As the years passed, the Yates farm prospered. What had been a struggling homestead became one of the most productive in the valley, known for the quality of its crops and livestock. Loren and Grisha worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, building something that would last long after they were gone. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Fenna who had her father's brown eyes and her mother's fierce spirit, and another son named Lucas, who seemed to have inherited the best traits of both races. The valley changed too, slowly but steadily. Other orc-human couples began to appear, emboldened by Loren and Grisha's example. It was never easy, never simple. There were still those who refused to accept the mixing of races, who preached against it from pulpits and taverns. But they were gradually outnumbered by people who had learned that love did not respect boundaries of species or tradition. On their 10th anniversary, Loren woke early and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Grisha. He walked outside into the pre-dawn light, looking at the land they had built together. The cabin had become a proper house now, with multiple rooms and a stone foundation. The barn was new and sturdy, housing more animals than his father could have dreamed of. The fields stretched out in neat rows, ready for the coming season's planting. 3 children slept peacefully inside, healthy and happy and secure in the knowledge that they were loved. He heard the door open behind him and felt Grisha's arms wrap around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. "About that night," he said. "When you knocked on my door asking to stay just one night," she laughed softly. "I am still here." "Yes, you are, and I cannot imagine it any other way. Do you ever regret it, letting me in, choosing this path?" He turned in her arms to face her, cupping her face with both hands. "Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grisha. You and our children and the life we have built. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." She kissed him, slow and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of history and the promise of decades more to come. When they broke apart, the sun was cresting the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "The children will be awake soon, and you know how Garrett gets if breakfast is not ready on time." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the day would bring. Behind them, the land they had tamed together stretched out green and growing, a testament to what could be built when people chose love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, hope over despair. Inside the house, they could hear Garrett calling for them, his voice still high with youth. Fenna was arguing with Lucas about something, their voices carrying through the walls. Normal morning sounds, the music of family life. Grisha squeezed his hand and smiled at him, and in that smile, he saw their entire journey, from that desperate night in the snow to this moment of perfect contentment. She had asked to stay just one night, not expecting to be there come spring. But spring had come and gone and come again, year after year, and she was still there. She would always be there, and he would always be grateful that he had opened that door, that he had chosen kindness over caution, that he had been brave enough to love someone the world said he should fear. That night, after the children were asleep and they lay together in the quiet darkness, Grisha said, "Tell me again." "Tell you what?" "The story of how we met. I want to hear it." So he told her, as he had told her many times before and would tell her many times again. He told her about the blizzard and the knock on his door, about the wounded orc woman who asked for just one night and ended up staying forever. He told her about falling in love despite every reason not to, about building a life together despite every obstacle. And as he spoke, she held his hand and smiled because she remembered too, and the memory was as precious to her as it was to him. "I love you," she said when he finished. "I love you too, always." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of the people below. But inside the house on the hill, in the valley where humans and orcs had learned to live together, 2 people held each other close and knew that they had found something rare and precious. A love that transcended difference, a partnership that had weathered every storm, a home that would shelter not just them but generations to come. The story of Loren and Grisha would be told for years after they were gone, passed down through their children and their children's children. It would become legend in the valley, the tale of how one man's simple act of kindness had changed everything, how one woman's courage had built a bridge between two worlds. But that was all in the future, unwritten and unknown. For now, they simply held each other and slept, content in the knowledge that when they woke, they would face the new day together, as they had faced every day since that snowy night when she asked to stay just one night, and he had said yes. The morning came, as mornings always do, with light and birdsong and the sound of children waking. Loren rose first, as was his habit, and started the fire. Grisha joined him shortly after, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease. They made breakfast together, a comfortable dance they had perfected over years of practice. The children tumbled downstairs one by one, rubbing sleep from their eyes and clamoring for food. This was his life now, chaotic and messy and full of love. It was everything he had never known he wanted, everything he had been too afraid to hope for. And it had all started with a simple question, asked by a desperate woman in a snowstorm. "Can I stay just one night?" One night had become a lifetime, and he would not have changed a single moment of it. Not the difficulties or the challenges, not the judgmental neighbors or the hard winters. All of it had been worth it to arrive at this moment, in this kitchen, surrounded by his family, knowing that he had made the right choice. He looked across the table at Grisha, who was helping Lucas cut his food, her face patient and loving. She felt his gaze and looked up, meeting his eyes. In that look was everything they had shared and everything they would share. All the days and years to come, all the struggles and triumphs, all the quiet moments and the grand ones. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and that simple exchange said everything that needed to be said. They had found each other against all odds, had chosen each other when the world said they should not, had built a life together that defied every expectation. And they would keep building it, day by day, season by season, for as long as they both lived. Outside, the spring wind blew across the fields, carrying with it the promise of growth and renewal. The land that had once been barren was now fertile, the house that had been empty was now full, and the man who had been alone had found his family. It was a happy ending, but more than that, it was a happy continuation, a story that would keep unfolding with each new day. Loren reached across the table and took Grisha's hand, squeezing it gently. She squeezed back, her amber eyes warm with love. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The story that had begun with a question in a snowstorm had become a story of love and family, of courage and acceptance, of two people who had found in each other what they had been searching for all along. It was a story that would continue for years to come, through all the seasons of their lives, constant and enduring as the land itself. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all. Not just that she had stayed past that one night, not just that spring had come and she was still there, but that every day after had been a choice they made together, a conscious decision to keep choosing each other, to keep building their life together, to keep writing their story one day at a time. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the day stretched out before them, full of work and laughter and all the small moments that make up a life, Loren felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. This was happiness, true and lasting, and he was grateful beyond words that he had been brave enough to open that door on that snowy night so long ago. Grisha had asked to stay just one night. Instead, she had stayed forever. And forever, he thought as he watched his children play and his wife laugh, was exactly the right amount of time.